talk at once. Thank you. So Howard, how's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I haven't seen it in its final state.
It looks good on a big screen.
It does look good. It does. It sort of lends itself to the scope and to the scale. I mean, the show sets up so much. This particular third season.
Yes, it does. There's a lot that you're teasing a lot there, my friend.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's talk about let's start at the beginning. I don't know how much you guys have seen going into this, but you've made a lot of changes going into the third season since the beginning. So talk about your approach going to the third season.
Well, I mean, the show has always been this really challenging. I mean, on so many levels, it really it is like it was kind of, to use the golf term, it was a sand trap. I mean, we told a story set in the Middle East in a Muslim country, a fictional Muslim country in the real Middle East, kind of defying every possible conventional wisdom, and you can, and had at the center of it a character who really didn't want to be in the show. I mean, when you think about it, Bassam Al-Fayed is a guy who was in Pasadena dispensing antibiotics to kids, and had not returned to his home country in 20 years, and at the end of the pilot didn't want to be actually was trying to flee, trying to get out of there even more than when he started. So the idea of actually getting this character engaged in the series itself was kind of a conundrum.
Sure.
It's really, you have a passive character. I can't think of another show where a character actually
doesn't want
to be in the show.
Right.
I mean, so finally, you see kind of reluctantly the show. This is really finally the premise of the series has kind of landed finally. And the second season,
it does feel like it finally you understand what the show's about. He wants to be there. His family wants to be there.
Right.
Sort of reluctantly, but
he has
sense.
the best. Yeah, he has the best intentions. I mean, behind it, is the question of what is a good man? What does it mean to be a good person? And I mean, that sounds like a pretty high tone promise, but I do think that it's one thing to, and as you can see here, and I think, as I told Debra, I think in an email, I said the first episode takes its time, which it does. I mean, I think it requires some patience, but we did introduce a lot of characters who obviously are going to set a lot of stories in motion, but the idea of conditional morality, which is, it's one thing being a pediatrician in Pasadena, and it's another thing being the president of a country in the restive Middle East.
And we'll see how. Yeah. Sorry, he's trying to be a good man in a place that sort of won't let him be a good man.
That's exactly right. And as as events progress, becomes increasingly challenging, and that really is where he's tested.
It feels like also last season you kind of course corrected a lot. Not that saying that it wasn't going.
No,
well.
we can be honest. I'm
Okay.
the most critical of. I mean, that first season was clunky to say the least. It was. I mean, again, part of it was the DNA of the show. And the way we, conceived it really was I didn't recognize how challenging it would be. And so last year, in a way, was really for those of you who saw it know, and those who didn't, it was a much more kind of mythic kind of almost biblical tale between these two brothers, where Barry really connects to. At the end of the first season, Barry tries to overthrow his brother in a coup and is discovered, and is about to be put to death, and his brother can't bring himself to kill his brother. I mean, Jamal, the sort of, the Uday Hussein character played by Ashraf Barum, can't bring himself to execute his brother, and leaves him in the middle of the desert to die, and says, "Let the land that you love so much take care of you." And he winds up going through the desert and getting saved by the beautiful Dahlia, with whom he kind of has a little thing, and winds up becoming the kind of the mythic savior of the country. So in the context, he actually kind of, he kind of goes native, or returns to his, not only to the land, but to his faith, which he turned his back on. So all those things, last year was really about connecting him to this place, and really finding and defending it. And now he's at the head of the table, like we saw.
And it feels like it mirrors a lot what's happening in the real world right now. What kind of research do you do to prepare to write?
In a way, from 24 and to Homeland, which or other shows I've done, this is sort of, to me, I sort of all consider this sort of on the continuum of that same or different facets of the same story. So I am just a foreign policy junkie. So I do a lot of research, but I don't consider research. It's just sort of what I'm interested in. And I think it is interesting to me, and I don't know how interesting it is to audiences. It is to me, and I guess that's where you have to start as a writer and as a producer. But I think that the story of our time is happening in that side of the world. I mean, I think we all read it as headlines and we read it as news reports, but I don't think we get to see it dramatized through the points of views of these characters. And in some ways, these characters really are distillations of, points of view and of characters that are in the Middle East. You have obviously we are all too acquainted with ISIS, which the caliphate is a stand-in for here. Islamists who are trying to engage in traditional conservative Islamic values, but not engage in violence. We're seeing progressives and women try to find the voice. So all these characters are represented in Tyrant. I mean, they're all distillations, and we're trying, and hopefully that's interesting to people to see how a government forms.
So how do you staff your writer's room? Who's in your writer's room helping you put the show together?
Well, the writer's room is this year a remarkably diverse group. I mean, Chris Kaiser is running the show this year. He and I, he's been with the show from the beginning, but in a more ad hoc way. And this year he sort of has taken the wheel, and I'm still very involved. So he and I really are sort of the pillars of the writers' room. But we have this year a whole new clutch of people. We had Glenn Gordon Caron last year, who those of you who are TV fans know created Moonlighting and Medium, which are great. He's no longer with the show. So we have a lot of young writers. Emmy Grinwis, and whose parents were both in the CIA. Daniel Goldfarb was a playwright. Anyway, it's a young, diverse writers.
And it feels like, at least from the character's point of view, women are starting to emerge and have strong voices and take charge.
Yeah, it's very much. I mean, what you'll see. Whether for good or for ill, the characters, there really is kind of, I think this year, that's one of the themes that does emerge, is kind of this female empowerment narrative. Once Jamal has, the long and dark and deep shadow of Jamal has been removed from the scene, Layla really does, as you see, begins to step forward and to test her power. Molly, and again, you'll see as hopefully you'll continue to watch and you'll see, but things do heat up pretty quick.
It's worth watching.
Yeah, things do. I'm really quite proud. I mean, this I think was a very challenging episode. Not challenging, but it does put a lot of the players on the table, and it talks about things that are, I think, a little heady. And so sometimes I think if you have patience, I think you'll be rewarded this season, because things do start heating up rather quickly. Molly does take a front row seat. As you can see, Dahlia, the woman from the sort of country woman, comes into the city and becomes this, truth and reconciliation committee type person. Fauzi, who last year was the reporter blogger who fled, whose daughter became radicalized, and who wound up and was the wife who was the wife of Ehab, who you saw, the disfigured guy who Barry saved last year at the end of the battle, and is now returned to the caliphate. The father of that woman comes back and kind of falls for Dahlia. So there are a lot of sort of triangles that are created. And
someone described the show to me as Empire meets Homeland. How do you feel about that kind of description?
I'll take half of those ratings, and that's good. No, it's that's interesting. Yeah, Empire meets Homeland. Yeah, I love Empire. Mm-hmm. I just love Empire. So it's actually stunning. Even some of the storylines are actually pretty similar. Maybe if they sang, right. I don't know, maybe or rapped.
I think they were just going.
That's an idea.
Yes, exactly. next season. But I think it goes towards the soap opera. Not maybe soap opera.
Soap opera is a good word.
Yes.
I actually think it's not a bad word. I think it's a good word.
Well, because there's a lot of, there's intertwined plots, and it sort of goes to what you're talking about all those, triangles that are happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's challenging, again, when you're talking about governance as a we had this sort of ridiculous semantic argument, not argument, conversation about the show itself, which is it's too political. Well, to me that is that's the engine of the show. That's the family business. I mean, whether is The Sopranos, again, it is a family drama. It is about people, and you have to find the people, and you have to find who the people want to be with, what the people want as people. While you're talking about things like democracy. I mean, democracy is not. I mean, Hamilton. I can't. I hope people who haven't seen it eventually. I hope you get to see it, because it really was a way to sort of take this really heady material about representation, about governance. Which I think what's even interesting to me is that we're in the midst of an election ourselves, and we're seeing these things come up. I mean, populist rage and how close we are from in this wonderfully safe and secure country, how much anger there is, and how challenging it is to hold this thing that we sort of take for granted together.
Because I think one of the questions for me always through the show was why Molly and the family wants to come to Aberdeen, why they stay in Aberdeen.
That was I mean, again, that goes back to the very beginning of this crazy show, which is like, why do people want to? We all read the paper. We know what's happening in Syria. We know what's happening in Libya. We know what's happening in Egypt. I mean, if you read the newspaper and you go like, why the hell would? And Barry is right. Why would? I'd rather stay in Pasadena. And so on one level, we couldn't make it so forbidding. But if you make it a fantasy, it becomes like this, it becomes almost like some Anne Hathaway movie. Like, what was the thing where she was?
The Princess Diaries?
Princess Diaries, yeah. I mean, she's the Queen of Fredonia or something. Yeah. So, it was a really hard balancing act to sort of make this thing feel real enough and emotionally credible enough, but at the same time, it really kind of lives in this weird tone, fable-like tone. Even the language is a little elevated.
Because you sort of understand why it's passion for Barry. He wants to come home. He wants to save his country. But is it safe enough to bring his family, his wife, his children there?
That is the question. I mean, right? I mean, the tone of that is just ridiculously impossible to answer. Although this year that all comes home to roost. And in a way, I think Barry was a very elliptical character for this family. He was kind of private. There was so much of his past he never really revealed to his family. And so now they've kind of see their father for the first time. In a way, he's more more holistic. He's more who he is. He's shown them who he is, and so they've invested in their own relationship to this country. Because the kids, Sammy and Emma, are also from this place. This is where they're from.
So there's this fantasy idea, like, oh wow, my father's the president. Wouldn't it be cool for my father to be the president? But is this place safe for them? Right.
And that line, I think, is the line that we skirt.
Right.
All the time.
So Emma finally shows up in Aberdeen.
Yes. We'll see what happens. Let's just say that Ehab is not going to sit, as you said, still. He wants blood.
He wants revenge. So we see Barry admit that he made a mistake by setting him free.
Yeah, and that's one of the themes of the show is again and again, like, nothing that you do that's bad and nothing that you do that's good doesn't kind of come home. The blowback and the shit that you get. There's sort of no good choices is what it amounts to. Jamal, raped his daughter-in-law at her wedding. And
you know how I feel about that scene.
I'll tell you something. Debra, it's funny. That was that. I think that could have been, it very well may have been a fatal flaw. She's not the first person to say she stopped. She turned off the TV then, and that was it. And we've had a very hard time roping some people who.
I'm back.
slowly, please. The show's different, but it really was. It was a turnoff turnoff to say at least. People were really offended by it, but and it was and we certainly discussed it, omitting it many times. But it turns out to be the act that everything sort of stemmed from. So I don't think it was a gratuitous moment. It was a moment of this desperately sick, broken character, pathetic, broken character. Who again, Ashraf Barham is kind of amazing in his ability to sort of be this monster who you kind of feel for.
It actually brings up a good point. Like, how do you paint characters as not 100% good and not 100% evil? Like, he can't be 100% bad, much as Barry can't be 100% good.
Well, I mean, in the pilot, one of the things is that he was a character who never got love from. We saw in flashback that he's not just a randomly crazy person. He's a guy who never was up to snuff, who essentially didn't want to be who he was, yet who had access to all this power and abused it readily and hungrily, not by taking what he wanted and never being faithful. And it was really just kind of raging against a destiny he never wanted. Now, does that excuse him? No, but it explains him a little bit. And, I think no bad guy ever wakes up in the morning and looks himself in the mirror and says, I'm a bad guy. And even Ashraf to this day goes, no, I was just protecting my son's honor. I mean, the actor, to get behind the part, said, I was just defending his honor. He didn't quite rape her. He tested whether she was a virgin with a digital test. Now, oh boy.
I know. we'll argue this forever. It's a whole
No, I know. I agree with you.
Right.
Right.
But then also talk about Barry and not making him 100%
Well,
good, because I think if he's 100% good, it doesn't work either.
Well, no. Well, and again, that's what's so interesting. I think about morality is that I think, and Tony Soprano couldn't be. I think he wanted to be good, but was Tony a bad guy, or was he just a guy in a business where he had to be bad sometimes? And we all, I think, experience those moments in our lives, depending on what job you do. Again, it's easier to be a good person, I think, if you're a caregiver or if you're a teacher. I think it's easier. But if you're an agent, sometimes it might be tougher when, there just are jobs where you have to do some pretty unsavory things just as an occupational hazard. And I think one of them is running a country under a military dictatorship.
And, then there's a matter of his relationship with Dahlia and, is
Right.
he ever be honest with Tim?
With Molly?
With Molly, sorry.
Well, as things, I can say that relationship, which sort of starts out with this, with this promise, gets challenged by among other things, the things that happen to the family in the next couple of episodes, but also by Dahlia, who is in the wings. So I don't know how long that marriage will last, or what the quality of that marriage will be if it does last.
Uh-oh.
Think Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yes, it's not going to end well.
No.
So let's talk about new characters. We also saw the introduction of Chris Noth in this episode. Talk about that and what role he's going to play.
Chris Noth is going to be a love interest for Layla as well, and he's fantastic. He plays an American general, kind of fashioned on Petraeus, and those are the characters he studied, who's going to try to reestablish with Abuddin an American base, American aid, because last year Jamal turned his back on America, and turned toward China. That blew up, and now America is going to try to establish a foothold through the point of view of this, so-called American president, which gives Barry a challenge because Barry doesn't want to be seen as an American any longer. That identity has to be kind of shucked.
Are you trying to make a statement about American military intervention?
I think when you start trying to make statements is when you start losing an audience, because but I think it's pretty. Everyone's pretty naked in their ambition and in what they want. So I don't think we're making a statement about it. We're just sort of, I think more than anything, illustrating and platforming what's very specific to Barry's challenge as the president of Abuddin, as the temporary, at least for now, the temporary president of Abuddin. I mean, again, there's an election that's taking place over the course of the season, and we'll see how well that election goes. But we also have some very interesting things. I mean, you asked about or I think I'm going to answer a question in the U.S., which is that we have other characters. The guy who plays Sheikh Al-Qadi is Khaled Abul-Naga. He is known as the Brad Pitt of Egypt. And I was there I was in Egypt just before Mubarak fell, about 7 years ago. And I was at a conference, and he was our host. And I mean, you go. He's swamped by people on the streets of Egypt. And then during the Egyptian Revolution, the Tahrir Square, he was the guy you saw on CNN, on Al Jazeera. He was one of the real progressive spokespeople. He has since run afoul with the government and is now living in Paris. A woman who plays Layla's sister, an actress named Basma Hassan, is also a movie star from Egypt who is now living in California with her husband, who is a member of the parliament, who also was too progressive for the current government. So again, without saying they were threatened, they were encouraged very strongly to leave the country. So we have really art imitating life, imitating art in the show in a way that's, maybe some of the more interesting conversations, or in the show, or hitting the bar at the end of a shoot day where you have a cast including characters from, there were like 12 different countries represented: Algeria, Egypt, Lebanon, Israel. Again, Basma Hassan, who winds up playing Layla's sister. So you have an Egyptian and an Israeli playing on the same cast, which is, potentially professionally hazardous to Basma, and also to Moran, who's an Israeli of Moroccan descent. So it's really fascinating to see how these people, and how this show is viewed in the Arab world. I mean, apparently the show is really popular, hugely popular in the Arab world.
Well, that was going to be my next question. What's the response of the Muslim community been?
Well, we have it's really strong. I cannot tell you, not only in the Muslim community, but actually I was in India too, not that long ago, and I was. Look, because Homeland is sort of, the show that has more right now has a lot more sort of, it's sort of like the popular kid. It's sort of the, I feel like if I had two kids, I had one who's like an All-American who scored perfect on the scores on the SATs, and one who's a little slower maybe. So, when people said, I love your show, I always expect them to say Homeland, but 1 out of every 7 or 8, they say Tyrant. And I sit up. I'm so happy when that happens, because the show, I think, is underappreciated, and then the people who actually are into it are really into it. I got a call from Dana Walden's father. Dana's the chairman of Fox. And he said, Howard, I have to tell you, Tyrant, I love Tyrant. It's best show on TV, better than Homeland. I mean, he watched on a long airplane the second season, and he really dug it. So, I'm hard on the show. We've been hard on the show for sometimes good reasons, and I think sometimes unfair ones. But I think the show has a lot, a lot to offer and does make you think, and I think makes us look, or allows us to look, at that part of the world in a way that audiences just don't get a chance. And I really I got to credit John Landgraf and FX for having the courage, I think, to sort of take on the show. I mean, I can't tell you, walking into a room and saying I want to do a show set in the Middle East, in a predominantly Muslim country. I mean, there's a conventional wisdom that you don't do shows off U.S. soil. I mean, think about that. I mean, now because of the proliferation of TV, I think that's opened up a bit. But in the past, that would never, ever, ever have happened.
What have your conversations with Landgraf been like about the show?
John Landgraf is really one of the smartest, most engaged. Network heads in the business. He's just so thoughtful. And I think by and large, we see eye to eye, both in terms of the challenges of the show and what intrigues us about it. But he's also really well read, and so they're often they're good. They're great conversations. They're deep, and I really appreciate his engagement and his support for as long as he's given it to us.
How did you come up with the idea for the show in the first place?
The show was presented to me by Gidi Raff, who actually was the creator of the Israeli version of Homeland, which is we loosely, it's a pretty loose adaptation. But he had an original idea for Tyrant, which kind of was the Arab Godfather, and he pitched it to me on the set of Homeland, and I loved the idea, and I worked with Gidi developing a couple of scripts, which he, English isn't his first language, and it went as far as, we did a few drafts, and then I sort of developed with Craig Wright from that point, with Gidi, of course, as well. And that was it. I mean, it's an original, the Arab Spring Godfather.
And has it gone the way you've expected it to go, or is it just continuing?
Nothing about the show has ever gone the way I expected it to go. It is really like I've been doing this for close to 30 years, and I feel like, just when I kind of think I understand the business, but again, I did it to myself. I took on a show that is really uniquely challenging, I think, but that's kind of where you have to. I think if you live in a place that makes you a little scared, it's a good thing.
What's been the most challenging part?
Honestly, the tone. I mean, tone on a show is everything. But even the political correctness of the show. Who the hell? When you think about it, who am I to tell this story? Even that is hubristic, arrogant, and politically incorrect, at least. So it was sort of getting past that. What I knew I was going to take a lot of shit for doing it. So that was kind of. I must be a masochist at some level, but I think I am. But I was genuinely interested in it. So it was understanding that this would be a challenging tone that was so up for grabs. Like, Is it a fable? Is it a fantasy? Is it real? How real is it supposed to feel? So as as something that really kind of is like nothing else, it's been a challenge, and again, one that we haven't always risen to. But I think the show is starting to find itself in a way, or has finally found itself.
Is there something you've learned from the experience of making it?
I have learned that I will never write a show with a passive protagonist again. I thought I could try to figure that one out. It was a lot more challenging than I thought. Just from a narrative point of view, what motivates characters, what drives them, and why do they do what they do is something you really need to, ask. Now, a doctor is always going to save patients. A cop is always going to stop criminals. A counter-terrorist is always going to stop terrorists. Why they do what they do is an interesting, dramatic question, but we know what they're going to do.
He does seem very internal.
Yeah. Well, he did, I think, for the first year, for sure. He was like, what am I doing here? And we asked the same question the character did, that was the challenge.
Right. But I guess what you're saying, it makes sense what you're saying, because everything happens to him, and he lets things happen to him, and he wasn't very active in making things happen.
Yeah. He was really reactive, which is really a tough place for a writer to write, and it's tough for an actor to act. And Adam, as an actor, has really, really grown, but I think part of it is because his character is a lot more interesting now. And a lot more legible, just at a really basic level.
Is there a moment you're proudest of, or an episode you're proudest of?
I'm actually proudest so far of the next two that come after this one. I really I think they're really engaging. So that's the one.
I know there aren't many of you here, but if anyone has any questions, go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. And when you say it, do you say it because it's challenging to watch, because it's hard to watch, because it is? Yeah, I mean that's a really well. Yeah, we keep writing. I mean, and we have the same feeling. I mean, when you think about it, it's like, and one of the conversations John had is that he said it's just not a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes shows have like the forbidden fun, or like there's there's a certain amount of quirk. The show is challenging. It's hard to watch sometimes because it's a little too real, and we all. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was thinking, going back to the first season, one of the things I did like about it, you had the Justin Kirk character who sort of added that moment of levity, yes. And it kind of broke the tension. As kind of crazy as he was, yes. He sort of offered you that moment of like, okay, I can sort of take a breath here.
Yes, but yet we never. It's funny because that he was kind of supposed to be a Graham Greene kind of character with that irony, and he never worked his way into the story because the story was such a steam. Right. It was hard to get him in. It was challenging to get him in the story. In an organic way.
Sure. But he just offered that commentary, and I understand that, and I feel like, because I watch Game of Thrones sometimes, and I feel like Game of Thrones is so intense, and then at least you get Tyrion, Peter Dinklage's character, and he's sort of like, God knows what he's doing, but he sort of wanders in a scene, drops a one-liner, and he walks out, and you're like, all right, at least I got to laugh.
That's right. No, Game of Thrones is a lot more fun. Mm-hmm. It is, because they're, dragons, naked women, I don't know, it just helps. It's just like,
exactly.
Swords, head,
and it's a
total unfair advantage.
Comparison.
Yes.
It's a totally unfair comparison.
But I will say, we got tweeted by Stephen King last year, who's generous, who said he really kind of liked last year, and Stephen King said he made the comparison, and he said something about Tyrant is fantastic this year, and at a tenth of the budget of Game of Thrones or something. So it was a real good shout out.
Take that, retweet it.
I did. I should. I got to get on tweet first. I got to Twitter. I don't even know what it's called.
Twitter. Start step one and learn the name.
No, I'm really like the worst social media person.
Exactly.
The worst.
It's hard.
It's hard. It's like, I don't understand these. Like Noah Hawley, I know there's actually, Noah has got a twin, but how do these people write novels, run shows, and tweet?
I don't know. I feel such pressure. All I do is basically promote the articles that I write.
Well, in a way,
I
it works.
wrote this. Read the tweet. And here's my tweet about it. That's what I do.
Right. It requires a kind of cleverness, though. It's like a haiku. I don't know.
And then I feel like the second if you make a mistake, you get busted on it. And please, I can't.
Right.
Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. There was a typo in
Drunk
my tweet.
tweeting.
Anyway, sorry. That's a total other segue. Anyone else have a question?
Yes. Well, you're pointing to it's we're going to get things wrong because we have, by the way, 3 sets of consultants on set 24/7. We have he's not Egyptian. I can't remember his ethnicity. We also have a group in Washington, which is made up of there's a Jordanian academic, there's 2 Egyptian dissidents, so it's sort of an ad hoc advisory group. I also work with the Muslim Public Affairs Council in L.A. and the Hollywood Bureau, and so everyone vets every script, every cut. But more to the point is that the show definitely risks, if those of you who know Edward Said, the Orientalism, the sort of parochial, flying carpet, magic, snake charming kind of stereotypes that the West has trafficked in, and I have to say that even the first episode with the father-in-law doing that, doing what turned Debra off to it, and again. Not alone. I know other people. No, but you're not alone. Mo Ryan said the same thing. I mean, she was like, she brought our Rotten Tomato score down to like, with the 0 or in the Metacritic, whatever it was. She really, a lot of people were offended by it, and I was aware of it. Again, I had this weird paternity with this script, in that I was kind of a midwife, and I wound up kind of adopting this child that I didn't quite give birth to. So, I was aware that there were going to be challenges, but we were very, very, very. We've been as assiduous as we can possibly be without making a documentary. But I think this year more than any other year, even last year, when you think about it, the Bedouin and the desert, even the benign, tropes are familiar tropes that risk stereotype. But I think this year there's a lot more that you see the students and what our consultants would say again and again is, you don't know how powerful the young people in the region are. This and where are those characters? And it just didn't fit in. We couldn't get them into the story. And this year they're really in the story. We created a set. I mean, in Budapest we have built a set that is as large as the Fox lot. So we've built, all that stuff is in Budapest. So we built a university with classrooms with a huge square, 2 stories. It's mind-blowing. So anyway, those voices, I think, are really, there's a much broader canvas of characters. It's much more populated. All those points of views are better represented. And I think that we are doing it, avoiding those traps more than we ever have. Yeah, I mean, I didn't either, by the way. And then I started reading some of the journals and reading some of the blogs and reading some of the books and the collections. And again, those are the people who really powered the Arab Spring. And I think they're some of the ones who now are getting smacked on the nose by, or the blowback of the Arab Spring and the huge disappointment that it's been. And if you think about it, the Arabs, all this stuff is like from the refugee crisis that that Europe is facing. I mean, the news. We're in this weird dance with current events, and oddly enough, again across Homeland, and I'm doing 24 again, and now Tyrant. I mean, I'm telling I'm pulling from current events differently for each show, but that's where history is happening. And then look what's happening in Europe now, and unfortunately, the world is it's like the Chinese. I say it's like the Chinese curse. You live in interesting times.
And ironically, what is a big factor going on right now is the role of social media in these revolutions and whatnot.
Yeah.
The communications, the use of Twitter alone played a great role in the Arab Spring.
Yep. Yeah.
How current can you be in your shows? How up to date can you be? How much can you incorporate the news that's happening in the shows that you're writing?
I mean, I think we. Sometimes we pull from news that's happened or things that have just happened and they inspire us, and sometimes we anticipate it, not because we're prophetic, just because, history has an you don't have to. History has an imagination. I mean, you can't. You look at what's happening on the ground and you can anticipate at some level, connect the dots, and it's not that you have a crystal ball. You're just connecting dots and you understand. When I was in Egypt 7 years ago, and I felt the tension. You felt like it was a bubble, the surface tension of the people, the anger. It's interesting. When I was in Rio at a TV conference a month ago, just before the whole political shitstorm there. You feel it in the air, and so you can anticipate these things at some level.
I mean, Homeland's been amazing at really anticipating what's about to happen. It's
Yeah.
kind of eerie.
It is. It is. It's a weird day. Alex was talking about being on a plane coming home from Germany, or going to. He was going to Berlin to film a scene in the subway in Berlin about a chemical terror attack, and it was 2 days before Charlie Hebdo. Yeah.
So creepy. Anyone else?
Not Charlie Hebdo. The theater massacre. We went to Tel Aviv. We were in Morocco and Morocco and outside of Tel Aviv, and then we actually left in the middle of this show. I forgot to in the middle of the filming in Israel, the Gaza war started, and so missiles. We were there for 5 days, and they were literally. We were in the air raid sirens, and we heard the missiles being intercepted, and we left. It was in the middle of the second to last episode, 3 days into shooting, and we went to Turkey. Packed up like a circus and went to Turkey, and without any prep, without any permits, we by the seat of our pants finished shooting the first season in Istanbul, where we couldn't even get permits or insurance because of events in Turkey. So we went to Budapest. I mean, again, this show should have been dead 7 times. I don't understand. I can't believe we're still standing. And we went to Budapest and built the Middle East. And then FX goes, "How are you going to shoot the Middle East in Budapest?" And I said blindly, "We will."
And you're here, and you did it.
We did it. And again, I have to. I would if I tweeted, I would shout out to the people, Gwyneth Horder-Payton, who's our directing producer, and Pav Hatupas, who's Pavlina, who is our line producer. Kind of like in a Werner Herzog movie, have taken this place and Rick Eads, who's our brilliant production designer, who built the Middle East in Budapest on the bottom of a sandy lake bed. But they're just phenomenal. She's like Mary Poppins, and they do it on a budget. I mean, Stephen King wasn't wrong. This is actually a very, very inexpensive show that looks like a very expensive show. So,
well done.
Thank you.
All right, on that note, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you guys for
Howard.
coming. Thanks, Debra, for doing it. Thank you. Tweet, tell your friends, watch the show.